Hello, everyone. In this monologue, I want to talk about a few of the myths regarding the Israeli Gazan conflict. It's now between the Israelis and the Gazans, not, I wouldn't say Palestinian, because the people living under the Palestinian Authority are living quite peacefully with Israel. So, a few of the myths and facts regarding the Israeli Gaza conflict. Myth number one: Palestinians are being occupied and oppressed by Israel. There's an occupation, there's an Israeli occupation. Not true. It's a complete myth. Keep in mind that the Oslo Accords in the 90s started the process of giving Palestinians, of removing the Israeli military occupation of the lands that it conquered in the 1967 war. And that is a process that did, in fact, transfer a lot of lands under Palestinian authority. And in fact, the only land that was, of course, that peace process eventually came to a grinding halt when Arafat rejected the 2001 brokerage by peace deal that Clinton tried to broker between, what was it, Ehud Olmert at the time. But anyway, when that was rejected, the Oslo process came to a halt. It was over with. And that's when the third intifada broke out and all of that stuff. Eventually, what Israel decided is that they were going to unilaterally withdraw from Gaza without any conditions. So the last large military occupation of Palestinian lands where Palestinians lived, was made in 2005. So there is now no lands that Palestinians live in that are controlled militarily by Israel. It's just not true. So there is no occupation. So it's a myth. There's no occupation. Anyone who tells you the occupation, the occupying force, what am I occupying? I'm not occupying anything. All the lands that you live in, you control. There is sovereignty. The PA has authority, and Hamas also has authority in their own Gaza lands that they control. So it's a different government, of course, but the Palestinians slash Gazans have their own governments. So they're not being ruled slash occupied slash oppressed by Israel. So that's myth number one. Myth number two: Gazans are in an open air prison. I've heard that term a lot tossed about recently. Open air prison. Oh, because yeah, so you're not physically occupying me, but you're not allowing me to move around, and you're controlling what comes in and what comes out. Okay, well, that is true to a certain degree. It is true that Israel has, imposed severe restrictions upon the entry and exit of both people and goods in Gaza. But what you're omitting here, very, very important fact, which is that after 2005, when Israel withdrew, the hope was that now that the Israeli occupying force is gone, now that they can breathe a sigh of relief and they can start becoming peaceful de facto. Even though they didn't sign an official peace deal with Israel, the hope was that the fact that Israel is no longer present, the occupying force is no longer present, would mean that they can just, stop being so hostile towards Israel. But that didn't happen. And so, in fact, the reverse happened. So before 2005, while Israel occupied Gaza, Israel was able to prevent military aggression by Hamas or any other would-be hostile actors. But after that, they started using resources to build rockets and bombs and to shoot them at Israel. And so this is what prompted the blockade. Okay, so the reason there is a blockade is to prevent the regime, namely Hamas, who is hostile to Israel and is the aggressor in this conflict. Okay, remember, Israel is the one who unilaterally, unconditionally gave back land and withdrew. So the reason there is an embargo slash blockade is so that Israel can screen out resources, materiel that is likely to be used for military aggression upon Israel, that is. So, and the same thing applies to people. It is true that Palestinians who live in the Palestinian Authority, yes, they do have to go through Israeli borders in order to travel abroad. but Israel allows them to do so. Why? Because they're doing so peacefully. Okay? So it's no big deal. Okay? Maybe it's a little bit more difficult for a Palestinian to do so than an Israeli, but Israel is happy to facilitate that happening as long as it's being done peacefully. So the reason the Gazans cannot easily, if at all, leave and come freely into Gaza is because they are hostile. And in as much as Israel suspects and believes that such movement is being done um, in a hostile manner, they will obviously prevent that from happening. So that's the reason. So other than that, there is no open air prison. Okay, you can do whatever you want. People live in New York City in a densely packed small area, and they're fine. Okay, so yeah, so the only truth to the fact that it's an open air prison is that they cannot freely move in and out. Okay, that's the only difference between that, for example, and living in New York City. But like I said, the reason for that is not arbitrarily, and it's not because Israel has a desire to occupy Gaza militarily. In fact, they don't, and they withdrew, right? The only reason for that is so that to prevent resources being used by Hamas to attack Israel. Myth number 3: in the current conflict, yes, it is true that Hamas attacked Israel and killed 1,200, mostly civilians, but certainly people um, that were not, you know, that were not engaged militarily against them, just a preemptive strike for no apparent reason. Yes, it is true that that was done, that they killed a bunch of civilians, but Israel routinely kills Gazan/Palestinian civilians as well. So, hey, it has moral equivalency. It's equal. It balances each other out. Wrong. Here are the facts. The fact is that there's a huge, huge, huge difference between what Israel is doing in terms of killing civilians and what Hamas is doing. In fact, it's not just that they're killing civilians in a different manner, but the whole military purpose of these operations is different. The purpose of Hamas is to annihilate Israel from the face of the earth. That is the only reason why they would still be throwing rockets at Israel. Think about it. In 2005, Israel would have been happy to give even more, and they possibly, I don't even know, I'm not sure whether maybe there was freedom of movement and freedom of import export before the hostilities began. But I'm pretty sure that Israel would have been happy to do so. And in fact, the Palestinian Authority can import freely. Why? Because they're not using it for military reasons, right? So Israel would have been happy to go a step further and give Hamas the same privileges that the Palestinian Authority has, if only they would just stop attacking Israel. That's all they wanted. Just stop attacking me, which they couldn't and wouldn't do. And so, yeah, so the Gazan attacks on Israel has no purpose other than just annihilating Israel, whereas the Israel attacks on Gaza are to prevent Hamas from attacking Israel. So in other words, the Israeli attacks are defensive in nature and the Hamas attacks are offensive. So huge, huge difference. Everyone understands that. I can kill someone in self-defense, right? And I'll go scot-free if it can be proven that it was done in self-defense. Conversely, if you attack me first, you're guilty of murder and you'll be severely, severely punished. So there's a huge difference. Everyone understands that. And like I said, it cannot be argued otherwise. I don't know how people can equate this. Oh, they're just two parties fighting. No, they're not. Okay, this is not the Palestinian Authority type of fight that was done in the 90s. Simply, oh, we want our own land, we want our own government. That's not what's happening in Gaza. They already have their own government. They already have sovereignty. They already have all that. And in fact, the reward for Israel giving them that is throwing rockets at Israel. That's how you respond to your adversary who is willing to concede to you. That's what happened. Okay, so there is no balance between the two. But let me go back to the topic to address it more directly. Civilians dying on both sides. So the civilians that are dying on the Israeli side, namely the attack that just happened last weekend, that's targeting civilians, or I should say, imposing maximum horror and death and calamity on Israel, regardless of who is dying. Like, there's no military objective in what Hamas did over the weekend. They knew they were not going to conquer any land, for example. They were not there to, you know, to put out any Israeli guns or military installations. There was no military objective other than just killing people. That was the only military objective. Just it's like genocide. It's just killing people. That's it. It's a murderous attack. That's all it was. Is killing people. They were not seizing territory, and they were not there to destroy military installations. Whereas the reverse, when Israel attacks Gaza slash Hamas, it specifically targets people, individuals, who either are planning an attack on Israel or have committed atrocities slash attacks against Israel. That's what it does. And so the civilians who die in the process are, at best, collateral deaths. Now, what does a collateral death mean? A collateral death is when I have a legitimate military target, right? I trying to shoot my enemy, who is, who I have a hostile slash adversarial status against, and I cannot do that in a clean way without attacking some innocent civilian, right? And so that's called a collateral death. Now, normally we say that we want to minimize collateral deaths and collateral damage. Well, you don't want to attack and kill or damage things that are not part of the target of that military campaign. Okay, so normally that is the case. But in the case of the Palestinians, it's actually even worse. It's actually even worse because the Hamas people, what they do is they consciously and deliberately put civilian in harm's way because, why do they do that? They do it for two obvious reasons. One is because they know that Israel is trying to minimize collateral damage. So they're actually exploiting that benevolence of your enemy against them, right? They know that their enemy is going to be hesitant, going to be apprehensive about attacking them if there would be collateral damage in the process. And therefore, they say, okay, come civilians, come join me. I know that my enemy knows that you're here, and therefore they're going to hesitate before attacking me. Great. Wonderful. And so, and the other reason they're doing it is because if Israel does in fact strike, then they can show the whole world, look at this, the enemy is killing innocent civilians. You see? So they're doing this in a very, very cynical and twisted way. If you have to summarize it and put it in one word, you would say that they care less about their own people than the enemy does. That's the only way to put it. Okay? Because they're putting their own people in harm's way. Their own civilians in harm's way. If you cared about the civilians, you shouldn't be consciously and deliberately doing that, knowing that your enemy is going to retaliate when you are attacking them. They know they're going to do it. Israel must do that, in fact. Israel cannot stand idly by when they are being persistently, time and again, being assaulted from Gaza. Anyone and everyone would respond. They would defend themselves. And so they know it. And so as far as Gaza is concerned, all they're accomplishing, as far as Hamas is concerned, all they're accomplishing is that it gives pause to the enemy. They're going to be forced they're going to be forced to, should I do it? They're going to be forced to rethink before they respond in an attack. Should I do it or not? Because I'm going to be hurting civilians here, right? And if they do it, I can claim sympathy from the whole entire progressive slash leftist world. Look at this. They killed civilians. And so it's being done very cynical. So yes, so myth number 3, there is no moral equivalent. The fact number 3, responding to myth number 3, there is no moral equivalency about civilians dying on both sides. So yes, it is technically true that civilians are dying on both sides, but the Israeli civilians are dying in a manner of indiscriminate killing that has no military objective, right? Whereas the Israeli killing of Palestinian slash Gazan civilians is done in a manner where Israel is in fact targeting a military objective that has attacked them first, I should add, right? And They are still trying to minimize civilian deaths, even though the Gazans are deliberately putting civilians in harm's way in a cynical way as described. Okay, myth number 4. Hamas is fighting for freedom. They just want freedom. They want liberty. Again, it's totally not true. I already addressed that in passing in the previous 3 myths. But like I said, if they want freedom, they got it. In 2005, that was their chance of Israel preemptively giving them freedom, even though Israel was not getting an official declaration, an official ceasefire agreement. Like normally, when 2 enemies are fighting, enemy 1 is not going to lay down arms unless enemy 2, they come to the table and they make some sort of truce agreement. But in this case, there was no agreement. There was no ceasefire agreement. Okay, and Israel unilaterally, without consulting them, said, "Okay, I'm going to stop fighting. I'm going to give you your freedom. You have your own land. You can do whatever you want." And so there's no freedom fighting on the part of Hamas. And again, the proof is the Palestinian Authority. They're the Gazans' Palestinian brothers, right? They're also in Palestine, and they laid down their arms. They stopped fighting, and they're enjoying all the benefits of freedom and independence and sovereignty that they could possibly dream of. Okay, the reason you don't hear anything about the PA is because it actually is quite peaceful and prosperous over there, right? So why isn't it in Gaza? And the answer is because they have not stopped fighting. They just keep fighting the enemy, not for their own freedom, but just to attack their enemy, for the sake of attack. Again, there's no objective to this. Like, what are you trying to do? You're trying to gain ground? Well, that wasn't the purpose of the Hamas invasion last weekend. It was just killing people. That's all they did. So those are the 4 myths. And thank you for watching, and enjoy your day.